I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 7th of December 2021 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:34 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and no members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and the waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. We pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Please note this briefing is being live streamed and recorded. By being present at this meeting, you consent to the possibility that your image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings may be made available on the City's YouTube channel following the meeting. Confidential sections of the briefing, if any, will not be live streamed or recorded. Okay, attendances, apologies and leave of absence. We've got Councillor Rosemary de Vries on leave of absence from the 2nd of December to the 8th of December. It doesn't look like we're going to have any apologies. Are there anyone with a leave of absence to submit? No. Okay. The next item relates to disclosure of interest. Are there any disclosures tonight? Councillor Burns, did you have a disclosure?
Yeah, I needed one. Sorry. I haven't filled it in, I'll just read it anyway. I, Mark George Joseph Burns, will declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at a meeting to be held on the 7th of December. Agenda item, if somebody could give it to me, it's the Dev West demolition. So let's add that in. Pardon? C2, okay. The interest is financial pursuant to Section 2. The nature of the interest is I am a pending candidate for a paid position in the Subiaco Redevelopment Committee, which is to be decided sometime in the very near future, which would make me an employee of them. So it is pending, but I still think it's a minor item, but would be inappropriate at this stage while a decision hasn't been made to be voting on the matter, in my opinion, and that's my interest.
So just to confirm, you've declared a financial interest, which for the record means that we're talking about business which it's reasonable to expect that if dealt with by the local government in a particular way will result in a financial gain, loss, benefit or detriment to a person, that person being you. Okay, Councillor Stroud, I suppose you and I have an opportunity to make a similar declaration if we feel it's necessary, given that we're both in the same position of having nominated for the Redevelopment Committee. No more interests to declare tonight? Okay. Right, there's no approved deputations and there's no announcements by the presiding member, so that leads us to officer reports, and we'll just work through them in order, starting with C1, the proposal to include 8 Rupert Street, 80 Bagot Road and 105 Thomas Street on the local planning scheme heritage list. Any comments or questions or clarifications needed on that item? Councillor Hammersley.
Thanks. Yeah, a couple of questions. I may have missed these, and I apologise if I did, but I was just wondering, would the officers be able to tell us what the zoning is for 105 Thomas Street?
Thank you, and through your presiding member, I think it's zoned residential R50. It's page 6 of the agenda.
Thank you. I missed that. Okay, and just also the point's made that the heritage list does not preclude development. I was just wondering, does it preclude demolition?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Just a correction on the applicable density code. It's R60, not R50, and we'll update that in the report before council meeting next week. In relation to demolition, it doesn't necessarily preclude demolition from occurring. It just means it's not exempt under the deemed provisions. So it would trigger the need for a development application, at which point we will consider against the relevant clause in our planning scheme, and we'll go from there.
Anyone else for C1? Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor, to staff. What benefit accrues to the city of having a home on this list listed against the wishes of the owner?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. I guess there's a broader interest from the community to heritage list properties. The owner of 105 Thomas have expressed, an objection. I guess in principle, it's outlined in the attachment to the listing. They want to keep their options open. They're not necessarily against the listing in the future. But yeah, I mean, if council could resolve not to adopt 105 Thomas on the heritage list at this point, that's open to council.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, but what benefit do we get by listing it? The owners, I think, say that they don't intend to do anything to the house at the moment that would affect its heritage value. So what benefit, if they're saying essentially they're going to keep it as is and they've got no intention of changing it, what benefit is it for the city in putting it on the list?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. While current owners have some very good intentions, the property may be unsold or their intentions might change into the future. So the benefit to the city is that any proposed change to that property would require a application for development approval. So the city has the benefit of considering any options and providing its recommendation, approval or modifications therefore for any application. It's also very consistent with the city's strategic community plan, which places a high value on heritage and protecting its heritage. So the city, in essence, will protect its existing heritage stock and will ensure that any future decision by the current or a different landowner will be carefully considered by the council.
Just one follow-up question. Their concern seems to be around the effect it would have on the valuation of their property. Would it diminish the future value of their property in the view of staff if it was listed?
Thank you. And through you, presiding member, the property values is not a planning consideration. So the planning consideration is the retention of heritage built form fabric. I'm not a valuer, so I can't provide you with that, but there are examples across I guess, Perth, where heritage areas and heritage list properties sometimes, well, in many cases, increase their value, given they are very sought after properties. The deed provisions that we operate under do have some wiggle room that allows for different development controls to be varied where the heritage of the place is protected. So we don't see it to be a critical devaluation of the property, but again, we don't consider that in a planning sense.
Perhaps if I could just add.
Go ahead.
Perhaps I could add in a general sense, and it comes down to, I suppose, whether or not council value the heritage in terms of the process by which you'd go about to list. And one of the things that I think Subiaco and Shenton Park and those particular suburbs are known for is the protection of heritage, and certainly the values in the area are highly sought after, given it is pretty rare to be able to live just a bit more than 3 kilometres from a CBD anywhere in the world with that type of traditional type home of that era. So I think in a general sense that policy, that position that council have taken and articulated that through planning to protect heritage is certainly known in the broader Perth area and would certainly be something that would be highly sought after.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you and following up on Councillor Wilson's questioning, and perhaps if you could, it's probably directed back to both what the CEO and the acting director said just now. I'm glad that and it is a question, that I'm glad that the CEO caged the concept of heritage listing as increasing value. It's been often said in this council chamber that it was an absolute certainty that listing beyond question, and a certain individual that was recently defeated by the mayor was probably the greatest spokesman of that concept. I don't actually fall to that opinion. I think it can be possible, right? But I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that it does. But moving, and I'd like a response to that in the nature of the fact that it's a question and where, if anything, it's drawn from. There's empirical evidence. But moving also then to the CEO by question, I do agree that collectively, and again, this is my question, that collectively the CEO is right to have this much stock this close to the CBD. You throw a stone there. Does have a value, but it has a collective value in that you're on a heritage street, so you're taking into a grouping situation. But I look to the fact that people still have freehold rights as to their property, and if they are consciously objecting, right, to the fact that they think it's diminishing it, right, I think the council needs to have respect towards that, even in light of what you said and our responsibilities. So perhaps if both of you could just add a tad more clarity, because I think it is important that these people, if we do push forward to do it, right, that we are accepting, that the full nature of these concepts, and that's what they are, they're concepts, right? They're not based on fact, there's not a book on it, there's not accepted by any authority as such. There is instances where there is, but I can tell you there's instances where it actually crushes value at the same time. So that's really, if it is close to a key question, I hope it is.
CEO.
Thank you. I suppose, look, it's a choice for council to make as to individual listings. I accept that. My point was a broader point in terms of what caused council to start this process in the first place, and has that been good for the city of Subiaco in terms of value and in terms of people that are attracted to come and live in these types of suburbs that has this type of housing stock. And what I'm saying is I suggest that that is the case, and why they're highly sought after, and that you, unless you just arrived from out of town, some other place, anybody that has lived in Perth for a short period of time would know that Subiaco, in terms of the city of Subiaco, values heritage. So anybody wishing to purchase a property would be doing so in those particular streets in the city of Subiaco with that intention. And so from my perspective, I think that creates value, and it was a wise decision of the council in the past. You may put yourself back to that point in time and say, well, what if council hadn't have done that and just had allowed everybody to decide yes or no as to whether or not their property was contained with that in the register? Would we have the Subiaco that we have today? But ultimately, it's a decision for council in terms of those individual listings.
Councillor Stroud. You've got another question, do you?
No, I did ask a question.
Okay, Mr. Petrosky answered the question, but I don't think we'll allow your right of reply to your own question, Councillor Burns. Well, we'll see what the answer is first.
Through presiding member, can you succinctly repeat the question?
Really, you know, I mean, it's a concept. It's the concept of value by listing is a concept. It's not something that you can refer to. You know, I mean, there's certain people have written on it, but there's also people that have written in the opposite direction. So it's conceptual. Okay, and that's why there is flexibility in how we deal with it. And I just wanted to think, and in light of what the CEO said, right, is what I am seeking is the CEO's second answer adds clarity to make the decision, because he's correct. Okay, so that's so if we do it, you know, I mean sorry, I'm far too loud. So if we do it, the clarity's there as to why as to why we're making the decision, and that's why the CEO was far more succinct. And I'm really just, again, so if I could go back to you, Alex, it's the director, acting director, is that it is conceptual, but there's an argument for it. You know what I mean? There's obviously an argument for it, albeit there is an argument where, you know, there is an opposing view. So.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Yes, absolutely. There's two arguments to that. So, you know, we come from the base of our local planning scheme, and the aim of that scheme is to promote and safeguard the special character and cultural heritage of Subiaco by identifying, conserving, and enhancing those places with cultural significance. So, we come at it from implementing council's wishes through the scheme and the strategy, and there's always a competing argument, and people have a process to go through to voice their opinions, and council is the decision maker.
Councillor Stroud? No. Councillor Hemsley?
Just picking up, I think it is important to understand this pretty clearly when we make the decision next week. So I just wanted to check that one of the main advantages, as I understand it, is in our it's not that new anymore, but as I understand it, we went from a planning system where individual decisions were made about demolition. And so, in a way, everybody in Subiaco under that old planning scheme legislation was always at the mercy of the council as to whether we would allow a demolition. And then that's the first question, is that right? That's the history. And then the second question is, the current situation is statewide, the law was set such that anything can be demolished by putting in an application for a demolition permit, which must be processed and issued within 10 days, unless there is a barrier. And the key barrier is that you have a property that is heritage listed. And I think your previous question said it doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to demolish, it's just that you have to go through this process. So am I correct in understanding from those earlier questions and answers that the real value to Subiaco is that we don't have the person won't have an automatic demolition right, which they could exercise within 10 days, and they will have to go through a process where a considered decision would be made on all of the facts and circumstances at the time that that application was made. Is that how it runs?
Thank you, and through presiding member, yes. So prior to 2015, demolition of properties was considered by individual planning schemes around WA. In October 2015, when the new regulations were released, it exempted the need for planning approval for the demolition of a single house, unless that single house was subject to a heritage area or heritage list. So now in the current situation, the only way to require an application would be through a heritage area, heritage list, and any application will be considered on its merits with the planning framework at the time.
There's no other questions. Let's move on to the next item. So that's C2, the Development WA referral to amend the DA for the partial demolition of Princess Margaret Hospital. Any questions? No. Let's press forward. C3, the draft waste local law endorsement for public advertising. Any questions? C4, Lords Recreation Centre. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you. Firstly, on page 23, it refers to the ageing nature of the building makes it difficult to attract new members and increase attendances. Can I please have a further detail about how the ageing of the building actually makes it difficult to attract new members and increase attendances? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. With contemporary sports, new buildings are designed in a way that they are adaptable and flexible to whatever that sport and fitness regime is. So by having an asset that's fixed in place and actually wasn't built as a purpose facility, it limits our ability to cater for the new and upcoming sports or fitness regimes. So there's one aspect to it. The other aspect is just the look and the way that the building is perceived. The other aspect is when we constantly have to amend bookings and change and actually cancel games and fixtures for sporting clubs because there might be a roof leak or something going on with the courts. It is a difficult market to compete with new and established centres, and sometimes when new centres come online, they put in really great marketing campaigns, and there is an attraction with the new, and especially with the contemporary sport styles going ahead. So it's just a brief outline of three key areas where it might be hard to attract new people.
I've got a number of questions, thank you, through you, Mayor, if I can just keep going. I've understand that actually the lack of parking space has been a limitation to attracting new attendances because we get so is that factor being considered? And if we actually increased our parking area availability, how many more new members do you think we could attract?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Parking is one factor for people attending the gym, especially or a fitness centre, especially those with children or some of those who are less mobile. Additional parking may assist in attracting new members, but if a new centre is considered, then the amount of parking will be considered with alternative modes of transport and the nature of services offered as well. So it has been considered, and it will assist in additional generating additional members. The actual number is difficult to give you an actual figure because it would depend on the type of services provided and the other modes of transport and the actual location of the centre as well.
In the business plan, if council were to go ahead and support it, will we be looking at the parking aspect and how the parking could be improved if we stay with that building?
So if I could answer the question, I think part of the recommendation here is to consider going through this process. And I think every option should be on the table for council to consider, particularly in that first part. And an important component to that is parking, access, location, etc. So there's certainly the elements that you need to go to. To the level that you go to would more likely be at stage 2. The first stage would be initially considering the types of sports that are currently and what may be presented and the options and the sites, etc., to narrow down something to have the community consultation with. So all those factors would need to be considered, but the stage at which they're considered varies in the depth of that.
Thank you, CEO. So as long as parking comes up in the first stage, even if we're not burrowing down too deeply, I believe it should be part of the consideration. Thank you. The other part that I'm interested in consideration is what we're actually in competition with in terms of indoor sports facilities. For example, I understand it's actually the only indoor tennis courts in metropolitan Perth, maybe in WA, but really metropolitan Perth is the only one we're really concerned with. So is that correct? I see a nodding, so I accept that is correct. It's the only, and I believe we have potentially 3 tennis courts, indoor tennis courts there or more? Definitely 2 are in practice, but I sense there might be a 3rd. Can I have that confirmed, please?
In No, I know that facts that it is the only indoor, as far as I'm aware, because I was advised by a former state CEO of Tennis West today that it was the only indoor courts. That's what I was advised, so that's why Serena Williams played there, is my understanding. How many courts?
Thank you, and through presiding member, I think there might be another one in Metro Perth, but it might be further south. What I would say is indoor tennis is a key component, and just through looking at the bookings is a very well utilised space in Lords, and that's one component of many. We have 2 indoor tennis courts.
I'm also interested in I'm hoping that the business plan will include what we're in competition in terms of, I mean, that place absolutely fills with schools playing volleyball, basketball, indoor soccer. So are we going to have that sort of information in the business plan? I appreciate there are a lot of gyms out there and small gyms and swimming pools, but I'm really interested in the indoor aspect, including the squash courts. Thank you. So I get another nod. So can I carry on?
Councillor Stroud, why don't we get an answer to that question first?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, absolutely. As part of the Part A business case, we would do an opportunities and constraints analysis, and looking at opportunities such as those that you've suggested are absolutely part of the scope.
The other part that I'm interested in under the heading of background information, and it says how the land originally formed part of the city's endowment and lands and is included in the city commercial property portfolio, which is quite reasonable if that's where it sits. What we're not told is the size of the land, including the car park, the value of the land, and what we'd expect in terms of an increase in value of that land if it was land banked. So if we kept it as a facility, what sort of percentage increase is a natural? Sorry, I don't know the terminology. I know Joel's looking at me and hopefully understands what I'm saying. Is it reasonable to expect a 10% increase over so many years and so on? Because I also see it as a land bank, and that consideration seems to be factored in at all. And will that be included in the business plan?
Thank you. Through the chair, I believe the land size is in the order of 17,000 square metres. The last valuation that was done as at 30 June this year by Griffin, I believe the valuation was $23.5 million for that site. In terms of future prospects and how the value of the site could potentially increase or decrease, it's really open to a number of different factors. But something that the business case process will look at is, potentially the investment side of the asset, and also the opportunity cost of holding the asset. So commercial considerations would certainly be considered as part of the business case process.
Thank you. Perhaps another way of looking at it is when we decided to take over the lease, there might have been a value of the land holding at that stage, and it would be quite interesting to compare what it was valued then to how it is valued now. Might be an interesting consideration if that could be included in the plan. The other, there's a comment, it is also timely to consider the extent to which ratepayers receive value for money from their investment in Lords. Now, I'm concerned about that statement because I don't believe you could consider that in isolation, unless you also considered whether ratepayers receive value for money from the library or from Rosalie Park playing fields, or from, you know, so many other parks and gardens. Some ratepayers wouldn't relate to those things at all, others would see great value. So I'm worried about that statement standing out in isolation without some comparison to other, if that could be considered in the business plan.
If I could answer through the chair, I suppose what separates just the piece of land out from the other sites that you refer to is the nature of the land holding. So it doesn't necessarily mean that council may be swayed or consider things differently, but ultimately the library, as well as where open playing fields, are generally vested land and they're not commercial lands. So that doesn't necessarily mean that council needs to determine that that site is not appropriate based that it is commercial, but just that council understand that in its decision making, that it is a different type of ownership of land and therefore has different opportunities. But doesn't mean that council still can't decide to continue on that piece of land, understanding that information.
My next question is refers to page 25 of and 27 of a PDF. It refers to the council resolved to close Lords to enable the replacement of part of the roof. It has never been clear to me, and I was certainly part of the council in that decision at the time, just how much of that roof was replaced. I know that a lot of money was spent, well over $1 million. I thought it was all of the roof, but I gather it wasn't. It wasn't. So, and this actually says replacement of part of the roof. So can we please have confirmation of how much of the roof and at what cost, please?
Thank you. Through the chair, we'll take that on notice, Councillor Stroud. I believe it was the section of roof above the pool deck, but I'd like to come back to you with something more accurate. We'll also respond to the question about price as well. Thank you.
Thank you. In regard to the problem of leaking through the roof, it's also been brought to my attention that that perhaps the air conditioners that were perhaps put back on the roof, maybe after that part was fixed. I don't know which part of the roof, but there's a lot of air conditioners up there, that if they're not placed properly, they obviously leave holes in the roof, and that's where water can't come in. So has there been any assessment of the air conditioners on the roof, as well as the panels, and whether they're causing any of the leakages?
Thank you. Through the chair, there are a number of different aspects that have been investigated in relation to the roof leaks, and a lot of work has been done already around mitigating the roof leaks. There is a lot of plant and equipment on the roof. There's HVAC, so ventilation units, air conditioning units. There are solar panels. There's quite a large hot water system. So the pool relies on gas hot water units, but also solar, which is on the roof. And all of this infrastructure is affixed to the roof. And so there are many, many different points where this infrastructure is fixed that the water can potentially get in. There are also some skylights, which the asset life on the skylights is more limited, so we regularly have to replace skylights to prevent roof leaks. When we get a sudden downpour, sometimes the stormwater drainage system isn't big enough to cope with the volume of water, so there are issues with box gutters, culverts running through the building, and all sorts of things. So to answer the question, yes, the aircon probably has been a contributor to roof leaks, certainly to the extent that it's affixed to the roof, but the problem of roof leaks is significantly more complex than that.
Probably if I can add and just pick up on one point, I think because of the unique nature of the structure as well, there is a lot of water that actually comes within the building through because it's been added onto. So the gutters, etc., and not ordinarily when you build a structure in one hit, you keep all the water out. That's the intention. So there's also that actually all the downpipes and all that actually come within the structure, which is unusual in most sites.
Thank you. There's reference to water leaks onto electrical installations. Would that be water from the roof getting into lighting wiring, or are there any other electrical installations that the water leaks might be affecting?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. That was one of the risks picked up in the engineer's assessment, that leaks from the roof could leak onto electrical installations, and that could present a fire risk.
During the COVID time, when we were encouraged as a city to speed up the spending and so on, the council agreed to $500,000. Well, first I'll confirm, I think it was $500,000, maybe more, to be spent on Lords. Has all that money been spent?
Through the chair, yes, there are a number of projects on foot in connection with the COVID fast track works. A number of those projects are still in progress. I'd need to go back and have a look at what was fast tracked and what was existing, but for example, the court netting has just wrapped up. That's a $250,000 project. The pool deck replacement is in progress. One of the issues that we've had with COVID is that everyone had the same idea as us in fast-tracking projects to stimulate their economy, and it's been incredibly difficult to get trades, let alone value for money trades. So some of that work that you've referred to is still in progress and is not as far advanced than it otherwise would be.
Okay, thank you. Do you think we're halfway there, or a bit more than that? Thank you.
Through the chair, I'd say we're about halfway there, but I wouldn't want to mislead you. I'll go back and have a look and give you a more accurate answer. Thank you.
Sorry, you've got a few more, do you, Councillor Stroud?
Thank you. With option 1, where it's suggesting it's open to council to resolve to exit the business of indoor recreation at a predetermined point in time, e.g. 5 years, at which point the land would revert back to being an investment grade asset capable of generating a commercial rate of return. Are we actually saying we would just revert back to selling it? Is that what those words mean?
If I can, through the chair, one of the things that council may consider is that prior to taking over Lords, it didn't undertake indoor sport in that way, and so it is open to council to decide that it no longer wishes to do so. What we've articulated in this report is that we consider that most local governments would think indoor sport, as it offers outdoor sport and libraries and other services, that's an integral component to the offering of the services of a local government for their community, for their wellness. And so on that basis, we're not recommending that, but it certainly is open for council to consider that if it thought that was appropriate, and hence why the recommendation, or the option rather, is included.
Thank you, but I still don't quite understand what we mean by an investment grade asset capable of generating a commercial rate of return. Where are we thinking and developing from there? Thank you.
So if I could, through the chair, what I described earlier was that this land tenure was different to the land tenure that ordinarily would be where you would include your libraries or your open playing fields, or most local governments where they would have their indoor sporting facilities. And so the city has a policy in relation to investments, and this land is held in freehold, so would be open for council to exploit in any way that it deemed to, which could be, for example, if it exited, there might be some sort of shed type business that was willing just to move in there with 10, 15 years to go. Obviously, I know they might be able to sell swimming pools or something because they don't mind rain, something like that, or water ingress. So, or alternatively, council would be in a position where it could redevelop the site and receive a commercial return. So there'd be many options in that regard, but it's just the type of ownership of that land being different to traditionally where you would put community assets, that it would be open for council, as with all the other commercial land holdings that they have, whether they wish to hold it to earn an income from or sell it to do something else with those funds.
My last question, thank you. The Australian Fine China site right next door has taken a long time to sell and develop. Have all the lots now been sold?
Thank you. Through the chair, I believe all the lots have been sold except for one, and that's the triangular shaped lot, lot 201, I believe, adjacent to Lord's on Hay Street.
That was the one singled out for social housing. That's right. And so my promised last question. So there's a lot of build for rent, Sentinel's build for rent. I think there's at least 3 going up. Is it 3 or 4? Thank you.
Thank you, and through presiding member, we are aware of at least one build to rent. There might be another one, 2 build to rents. Thank you, I've been corrected. There might be another one in the pipeline, but we are unsure of whether that one will proceed or not.
Yes. So we would know, though, if they had bought the land or not. We should know as a 20% stakeholder who owns the remaining land. They're just about finished a second one. I thought there was a third one going up on Hay Street. Is that something that the city can find out?
Thank you, and through presiding member, we are privy to owner information and names. However, that might not allude to what they are planning to do or how they develop the lot, and it's probably not something that we would share at a council meeting.
Any other questions? I'll start with Councillor White.
Thank you. Just brief ones, I think. One point I feel is missing in this is there's talk about value for money, and I'm pleased to see that, an issue about better strategic and economic outcomes. But I was hoping we might see a economic impact assessment of the options that would be presented in Part A. So what impact would be envisaged on an existing private sector providers of fitness services, both positive or negative? And it would seem to me that we're not going to get, we haven't, in terms of scope, I don't see that here. Is there a possibility to include it? I've got 2 very other short questions. It also says location, whereas above it says it could be in multiple sites. So I think it's probably better that we're looking at potential locations. I'm talking on page 27. And historically, I recall that there was a purchase of the name Lords. Are we going to continue calling it Lords?
If I could, through the chair, in terms of the economic appraisal, and that would be more around Part C of the, once you've finalised and a little bit tighter in terms of your options, and you're then going to consider the implications, and by then you would be in a lot greater position to understand exactly the offering and narrowing down those choices. So in terms of the name Lords, certainly it had value when we purchased it, and I would think it would still have value for the city, but that would be a decision of the council. From what I understand, the people that go there consider it something that's important in terms of what it means, and so I imagine that part of the consultation we're likely to hear that that's something that would be highly valued and that they would recommend council would continue to use it. But ultimately, when we go through the full process, that would be something that council may consider.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. For staff, on page 26, it's noted that with the observed defects and potential safety hazards, etc., that there is a risk. Now, is there a risk, especially in the future, about maintenance and how it will be managed? But is there a current risk? And if so, to staff and to patrons, if so, how's that being managed? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, there are risks in running a facility. So, as required, we have a risk matrix that identifies all the risks and any mitigation strategies. Of course, with an ageing asset and the nature it's been built, for example, accessing the roof is a risk. So when you would create a new building, you would have gantries and proper places where people could work from heights over 2 metres, and we have to manage it in other ways. So there are risks that they are all mitigated, but with an ongoing ageing building, those risks can increase.
Any more questions? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Chair. As you wish to direct, but the previous statements were made by Mr. Guest. Reference was made to the last valuation, and seemed, from what I heard, that a reasonably recent date came in at 23 plus million for the 1.7 acres of hectares of land. I'll just, if he wants to make notes as I'm asking, so I don't have to repose the questions. I'm just going to ask them in the list, because they're pretty brief. One, in valuing it, what's its current land, what land use was applied? Two, would Mr. Guest agree that the valuation itself, irrelevant of the use that was accepted at the time, that a valuation can be altered by lesser uses if the property was sold, or more intensified uses, which the council would have the option to do if they wish to. Obviously just noting that by intensification to increase value, that is arguably something we may not wish to do. Three, would Mr. Guest also accept that valuations by their nature, especially probably in the sense of local governments, are really ultra conservative in their nature? So they're the questions I'd pose at this stage, and I have a follow-up question too.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, so typically the valuer will value the land based on highest and best use, but not always. So before I answer your question, I'd like to check that. In terms of whether or not the use affects the value of the land, yes, absolutely, I'd accept that. In terms of whether or not valuations are subjective, I think if you were to ask a certified practicing valuer, they would tell you that it's very much a science. And what I would say, in my experience, is that this valuation we have for Lords is more or less consistent with the valuation that we had last year, which was done by Burgess Rawson. So this year the valuation was done by Griffin, last year by Burgess Rawson. There's been a marginal increase in that time. And given there's no wild inconsistency, I have no reason to be cautious or sceptical of the valuation. But I do accept that there is a component to this which is probably a bit of art as well as science. And that's why you would never say the valuation, hand on heart, is exactly what the valuer gives you. It's really determined by a market process. And what's the test? What a willing but not overly anxious buyer would pay, or something like that. Thank you.
Follow-up question?
The sayings are just, as I know, the saying is it's willing and willing buyer. But carrying on, and thank you for those answers. And if you could get back, I gather you took the first question on notice, that you'd get back to what land use was accepted, so that we can have that for the in 7 days. As to the nature of the report and comments by the CEO through the chair, I'm presuming we're adopting an all-option approach to what we do. So, and I don't want anybody to take this in the wrong light, and probably I'm speaking to the press, but literally everything from going out of the sport and recreation business entirely, and disposing of the land or redeveloping it or something, all the way through to actually redeveloping the site to a much better Lords. So, and everything in between, from I think there's been discussions of just in spitballing that Lords could be disseminators as such, and be broken up and put in different places over the cities with different parts of its use, etc. So anyway, the nature of my question is that it really is a report coming back with, besides the ridiculous, all possibilities from one end of the scope of things. So am I taking that correctly? And I've got a follow-up.
Yeah, if I could, through the chair, what the manager has described is a bit of a gated process, and part A is that real order of magnitude, really considering, assuming council resolve 2B in terms of commence this process, it's really for council then to work through, what is possible, what are the options, and then have a process by which they can narrow certain things down, because this council may determine that that's not something you wish to consider for whatever reason. And absolutely, I would think that complete redevelopment of that site is one that council will want to consider, and that we need to consider. And then there's a range of other options within that, including on different sites outside our boundaries, for example. So consider all those options, narrow them down, and then have something meaningful to talk to the community and the customers about, what's your views on those type of proposals. I don't know how many of those proposals will be, but I think that's the first part of the work to be done, and then council are in a position to have some sort of meaningful dialogue. At the moment, option 2B is a complete blank sheet of paper to work out what are those options, and that's what's intended here. And then you go down a gated process to narrow them down, and then arrive at what may be, as you say, a complete rebuild on the existing site.
Thank you, CEO, and through the chair, just to finalise on a previous question, I'm sorry who asked it, but as to the purchasing in the name of Lords, if we perhaps could have some clarity, I don't know for what particular reason, but I think it should be understood. From my understanding, the leasehold was reacquired for a rather large amount, but that's in the history. The name was a part of, I think it was $500,000 was paid for it, but it was really paid for it also with fixtures and fittings, etc. So it wasn't just a purchase of the name itself. It was packaged up with, so the name might have been $1 and the rest of it was equipment, etc., as opposed to the property. So I think it might be something you need to look into, but if the question has been asked, I think it needs to be answered. But I do accept also that the name itself has a value if we're going to continue with it. So, but I'll leave it at that. If we could have some, if the question's asked again, I think we should be prepared to answer it in 7 days, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Through you, presiding member, yes, the city purchased the name as well as some fixtures and fittings, I think around gym equipment and things like that at the time, and was approximately for around $500,000 in total, which was for all of those things.
No other questions for C4? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, yes. My questions are really just about the scope of what we could expect in Part A. And I appreciate that we've been given alternatives, options may include, but like some of the other elected members, just exploring how far that might go. So I was just wondering if we'd be minded to look at the site as more than just a potential redevelopment site for sports, and whether we'd be casting our minds to whether we can have a mixed use site where perhaps there could be some residential as well as it's a very big piece of land. I know there'd be costs involved, but it might be that we would look at the potential for residential, sports and some small service facilities for that whole, fairly medium density area. So I was just wondering if we're going that far or if we're just being very sport focused.
Thank you. Through the chair, Part A is very much a high level options analysis. So everything's on the table, including what you've mentioned. But what I would say is that when we look at the possibility of refurbishing the existing facility as an option, or even rebuilding a new facility on the existing site, looking at how the broader site might be redeveloped into some sort of a mixed-use development is probably beyond the scope of Part A. Part A is really just looking at the high-level options, bringing everything back to council so we can have a discussion and a debate about it. But if council is leaning towards redeveloping the existing site, then a deeper dive into what that might look like is something that we'd pick up during Parts B and certainly Part C.
So I take it from that then that the fact that it doesn't get on the page, the blank page, in Part A doesn't preclude it turning up sometime later?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that's correct. This is very much an iterative process. And so once the Part A business case has been prepared, that will be brought back to council and hopefully engage in some discussion, some debate. And, you know, it may take more than one strategic workshop and one council meeting to get through Part A to Part B. You know, that might take a couple of goes at it. And similarly, once we get to Part B and, you know, we go out to community consultation, we get a feel for what the community really wants and needs, it might take a few goes to get from Part B to Part C, and that's okay. You know, this isn't a fast-track process. This process is designed to make sure that everyone has an opportunity, council and the community, to shape and to guide the project, so that we don't go off and do lots of work and come back and it's not the right thing. So it's very much an iterative process. Nothing is ruled out. Everything's on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, on that continuing theme, I noticed in our next item in the corporate business plan that when you look at the track changes on the thing, you're sort of picking up that there's been a little waning of our focus on the land in Subi East. And I was just wondering whether conceptually that well, we've got that MOU with the state government about that piece of land and the potential future use. We know it's tied up for 5 years, and of course that's entirely sensible, because nobody could have built that thing in 2 years. So, but I'm just wondering whether that's one of the things that's on these alternative options, because it talks about partnering with another entity, example local government, and it came to mind that the state might be another entity. And so there's that, and also just something that we really started to look at with the social infrastructure report, and we've brought together a lot of information about our other social sites, PCYC and other sites, and you know, this concept that's kind of around about needing to be a bit holistic in looking to the future and seeing which assets are underperforming and how we might bring them all together so that we get economies of scale with things like reception services and stuff like that. So Part A is a pretty big job, so I do think it will take a lot of effort and a few goes, but I'm just hopeful that we really do get everything in so that we can work through it. So I was just wondering if those ideas are sort of within the staff's contemplation.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, absolutely. And I'm cautious about trying to preempt what the options might be, but certainly, you know, the possibility of building a new facility at Subi East is an option that should be on the table. And in undertaking the Part A, for potential locations, we would need to do an opportunities and constraints analysis. So, you know, you've touched on some of the opportunities with Subi East, possibly tapping into some sort of a partnership arrangement, but then there are constraints with that site as well in terms of the footprint and other factors there. So I think everything's on the table. We'll need to do a comprehensive opportunities and constraints for each site, but certainly we've got an open mind about it and nothing is precluded.
And I suppose if I can just add, a lot of the great work that's been done in the past forms part of the informing documents, so that is absolutely part of the scope to consider the information in the social infrastructure and the like as part of that process.
There's no more questions to my right, is there? Yep, okay. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mayor. One more question. I did raise at a prior workshop the possibility of taking advantage of the north-facing roof with solar powers and capturing energy and so on. Is that something too that will be considered in the plan? Thank you.
If I could, through the chair, that would come down more to the Part C and the feasibility side of things, because that's when you're getting a bit closer to reality about the total scope of the project and what's in and what's out, and what the price of things are, and also in particularly energy needs, and obviously conscious of our target in terms of 2025 as well. So all those things would need to be incorporated, but the detail around that would probably be more likely in that sort of Part C, once you're into very less options than what you would be back at Part A and Part B.
I might ask a question. Look, I'm not sure who's best placed, but my question is, can we have a short walk through of what a high-level options analysis might look like? I mean, are we going to look at other local government facilities in WA or across the country, and are we going to look at commercial operations as well, and are we going to look even further abroad? Maybe just a bit of an overview of what the process might look like, please.
Thank you. Through the chair. So Part A, as we've said, is reasonably high level. We would begin by articulating the purpose of the project objectives, and the project objectives are really important because when you come to assessing the options and trying to make sense of everything, you really come back to your project objectives and your options assessment criteria. So looking to refine that and articulate that at the beginning. We would most likely engage a lead consultant to do this piece of work. The lead consultant would likely appoint an architect, but when we engage the architect, we're not looking to design a new building or refurbish the existing building at this stage. In some ways, there's a little bit of trickery that happens in Part A. So what the architect might do is they might look at different locations and do some block massing. They'll look at the asset mix, the accommodation schedule and the sporting mix, and they'll build that up into a block massing model. And the reason that they'll do that is to look at where that might sit at various locations. They'll look at opportunities and constraints with respect to different locations, and whether or not the built form footprint will actually work at particular sites. The architect might prepare a rendering of what a possible building or refurbishment of the existing building might look like. And this is where there's a little bit of trickery, because really it's just a representation of what it could be, not a full design of a new building. And quite often with this process, there's a lot of enthusiasm, which is fantastic. And people start to comment on, how they would like the tennis courts to look and the pool to look. And that's wonderful, and that's great enthusiasm. But that granular level of detail is probably not something you'd get to until later on in the process, once you've really refined the options. So once you've canvassed all of the options at a high level, you do a bit of an investigation into those options. You might get a quantity surveyor on board to do a high-level QS estimate of the different options. So you'd prepare a budget, a draft cash flow or net present value analysis. You might also do a high-level risk assessment. Some options might be simpler and easier to implement than others. So all of this will factor into the mix and will help council hopefully to assess the options and deliberate so that we've got something to consult and engage our community with. I hope that answers the question.
Perhaps I could also add, if that's okay, to just give a couple of practical examples on what it looks like and how why objectives are actually really important to go through in the first instance. So if you look at two recent examples, Coburn Arc, for example, that was a different set of circumstances by which they considered and what their objectives were, and it certainly wasn't about profit making. If you compare that to the Collier Park RAF in South Perth, the council were very clear that actually that actual new recreation aquatic facility needed to make a profit, right? And it wasn't to cost the ratepayers any funds. So that narrowed down a range of different sites that were excluded because the best location to do that was actually on the Collier Park golf course, and mixing golf, which made money, driving range, mini golf, climbing wall, those types of facilities. So there was very clear objectives articulated up front by the council at South Perth as opposed to Coburn, very different set of objectives, and that led to the site selection being quite different than what would have ordinarily been had they had the same objectives of Coburn. So that's why doing that initial process is really important to articulate those, and that helps inform whether the site selection is appropriate or not.
Okay, I think I was lucky last, so let's move on to C5, the Corporate Business Plan for 2021 to 2025. That, of course, is an annual review. Any questions about that agenda item? Councillor Jennings.
This is just a bit of a general question about certain things being removed or deleted. Some I could work out that maybe they've been completed, or maybe but I wasn't sure for some others what's happened to them. So is there a theme, or is it just an individual thing where some of the things that have been deleted, like some of the projects, and I mean there's innumerable examples in there, so I could go through and say a whole number of them, but have they been completed, or someone's made a decision to drop them? I can maybe find something. I'd have to look at my attachments to find an example. But anyway, there are quite a lot of examples of things that have been crossed out and sort of not replaced. So, is there a theme, or it's all individual, and we have to sort of ask things individually in that regard? Thanks.
Through you, presiding member. In the review, we've basically indicated in the report that we've done a desktop review. We've consulted with various managers and the directors and looked at projects. So if they've been completed, we've basically striked them through. I don't know if that's very good grammar, and removed them. Unless there's been a council resolution to effect that we're working on something now, then we haven't included items, because obviously in this next 12 months the council's going to be doing its strategic planning, and if the items aren't going to be done between now and the end of next financial year, we will look to incorporate them into the full review of the corporate business plan following the strategic community planning process. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor White.
Thank you, and maybe I've got an example that Councillor Jennings is looking for. Two quick questions from me. Nighttime economy was dropped, page 28, strategy 323, and I'm just wondering why that might be. And similarly, parking detection technology was dropped, page 46, 523. And so the same question applies, really. Is that, have they been done? Have they just been dropped because they're too difficult, or for some other reason?
So through you, presiding member, one I'd have to take on notice because I'm not quite across that particular one, which is the nighttime economy. The other one, in terms of the parking, unless I get it wrong, we've introduced our parking wayfinding website and wayfinding devices within our car parks and various technology Our other thing we're looking at doing is upgrading our ticket machines over the next 5 years in terms of more smart technology. So no longer did that project have something that was driving us that's already in play or completed already.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, this is very much on the same subject. In fact, part of it, I think, was almost mentioned in the previous item by Councillor Hammersley. The social infrastructure plan is marked, crossed out. Is that no longer going to go ahead, or what's the situation with it? And at the same time, we may as well do it. So CSMRF, the co-shared facilities, had a line through it as well.
Through you, presiding member. In terms of the co-shared multi-use recreational facility, that's been struck through because at this point in time, if the land's been allocated to the Department of Education for the tennis courts, it's been vested in education. So we've pursued that as far as we can at this point in time. That could potentially come back into the next major review of the corporate business plan. So I think it was a 5-year vesting to the Department of Education. The other one, just trying to remember what was... Oh, the social infrastructure plan. As we worked through that through council, effectively that got changed to a slightly different form, and we've got the base document in the inventory, and that will be incorporated into our community facilities planning going forward. So the actual base work that the council then reviewed, we've completed, so we're not looking to develop a full-on plan.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, a couple of others then that have also been changed. I think under destination, there are street parties have been crossed out. No more street parties, is that the suggestion? And if you like, I'll add another one as well. And that's on page 30. It's to do with heritage, and that local planning policy for heritage has also been crossed out. So would you get a comment? Staff get a comment on both of those?
Through you, presiding member, my understanding in terms of the street party, the purpose of crossing that out was so what we've been progressing in more recent times is planning in terms of what type of events the council wants to consider and endorse. And so we didn't want to have it just locked in that we're doing a street party. Doesn't preclude the city from determining that it might do a street party one year or the next, but it was about having us locked into we're doing a street party, where what we've been doing is doing work determining what type of event and how we could actually generate economic benefit to the town centre, and how that might be played out, and that's been brought through EBSAC and to council each year, and they've determined what the program is. So I don't think we did do a street party last year, is my undertaking.
Thank you, and through presiding member, I'll just add on to that. So the challenges with COVID-19 has meant that we've implemented tailored events, which have had great success. So again, we are facing a reality over the next few years that large-scale events are going to be difficult to undertake, and we are having greater tailored events. And the other one that you mentioned was about the local planning policy with regard to theme provisions which promote heritage conservation. That was completed. So that was adopted on the 20th of October 2020, Local Planning Policy 3.3.
Councillor White.
A question based on a reflection of the questions put. would it be too much to ask? I mean, it's hard for me in terms of voting on the corporate plan, on this plan, without an explanation as to why the changes were made. And it would seem to me a simple document which would simply on one side of a column say what changes were made and a sentence or two on the other side to say why. Something has been completed, we decided no longer to go along with this, the technology has changed. It just seems that the summary in the agenda doesn't provide that data, and even reading the attachment itself doesn't provide that explanation.
Through you, presiding member. We did do an annual review of the corporate business plan that went through, I think, just a couple of months ago, 23rd of November, where we reported on all the actions and projects within the corporate business plan. And so in that, we actually put commentary saying these items are being completed and so forth. And then what we've done is this is the actual review of the annual, the review of the corporate business plan itself. So then we've followed through with where we've identified those actions as being removed. But what we can do is just some additional work and then make that clear for you between now and the council meeting.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I'm a little bit confused because I opened my attachment today and I can't find any crossing out. Oh, it's in for information. So, okay, because I opened up attachments and I still got the corporate business plan with the additions. So I can assume that is still the right plan. Okay, good. Because, for example, where we're talking about heritage, for example, they've said make available information about Subiaco's local history. And my question there is, how are we going to make it available? Is that going to be part of our new website resource?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, there's a range of material that we can provide. So it's ensuring that it's accessible to everyone. So that's whether through the website, whether through printed material, or whether through services accessed by the city.
I have another question, thank you, Mayor, and it refers to on page 26, where we're talking about supporting business groups, and one of them is mentor and support Subiaction. And I just wondered what the status of Subiaction is. Have we got a renewed program with them for next year? Do they still exist? I'm just interested in their status. Thank you.
Thank you. And through presiding member, Subiaction are a town team. So I can't provide you exactly where they're at, but we can probably take that one on notice and get some more information for you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So are we being too prescriptive in our corporate business plan by mentioning names of groups? So we better just to say mentor and support business groups in creating events and so on. Does it matter that prescription or that detail? Or we better just to leave it open because maybe a new town group will form, or another opportunity in another area.
Through you, presiding member. One of the things we've tried to articulate just in the brief covering report is because we only did a desktop review of this corporate business plan, we tried not to substantially change any kind of actions that were already in there that were ongoing actions. Because, as I indicated before, the council is going to do a review of its strategic planning going forward over this next period, and we thought that those kind of things we could address in terms of when we produce the new corporate business plan to implement the vision of the council going forward.
Perhaps if I could also add, the Minister has put out for advertising, as we've spoken about these big changes in 25 years in terms of local government reform. And so it's still a bit unclear as to how the integrated planning framework will be, well, in terms of the templates and documentation and what's required in the future. But certainly will change if that is to be implemented in terms of what we currently do as a strategic community plan and then a detailed corporate business plan. So having a minimalist approach as well is probably important. And in addition to that, as a new council, you've been starting and going on a visioning exercises and starting to work through priorities, etc. So that's really important business for you to continue to do. This is really sort of just I suppose, a continuation. We're required to update it, but I suspect that work of the first 100 days will flow into you articulating some visioning that we would be in a position at some stage to go to community consultation, but may well be that the form and content is quite different to what we currently do as well. So I think we continue the work of looking at strategic priorities and shaping that up, but it may well be that it looks quite different to the current regime of integrated planning, if I can say that. So we've had a minimalist approach in that regard, knowing that it may well be quite different as well.
Yeah, Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. That actually leads on to my next question. Perhaps you've answered it, but let's just work it out a bit. Because recently we've been asked as a council to start sorting our priorities. And so, and we've also had a planning day of visioning and so on. So I wondered how it did sit with this corporate business plan. So, actually, rather than trying to answer my own question, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So, we'd started a process. Obviously, the new council's come on board and very keen to work together about those priorities and the visioning, and so what makes Subiaco such a great place and those sorts of things that you've been considering. That's a really important process for council to go through, and what that ordinarily would have looked like in the future would be that would then form part of what we would be able to start a community engagement process around. Does these sorts of priorities and this vision make sense to you as a community? And from that, you would then be able to build a new strategic community plan. It may well be, but that when you're in a position to do that, you still wish to go out and test that. But you may just have to hold back in terms of the form and content of what that's supposed to look like in terms of a strategic community plan, being a 10-year type vision type document, because the new requirements may be something different. You would then ordinarily then go through that to determine a corporate business plan as it currently stands, but once again that might be slightly different. My understanding is they're very much keen to understand services and costs and levels of services, which is quite different to the way, even though we do describe services in the corporate business plan and we do add costs in terms of projects. Not every local government does that, but that they are looking to a slightly different format. So the work that you're doing is really valid and important, that you get to a point where you're able to have some consultation. What it then looks like in terms of those documents that you'll adopt, I can't say right now because of the potential or what's been described within the local government reform. So, but it's important that we do the work.
I might just add that we'll be probably talking about these very things in 24 hours from now at our planning session tomorrow night, and you'll all have some notes prior to that session. Any other questions about this agenda? Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, this just follows on, because I think I had a similar reaction to Councillor Stroud, which is this sort of seems a bit premature, in the wrong order, as often happens in local government. But I'm just not picking up, and it could be my inadequate reading, but what's driving the timing of this decision? Why do we have to make it this month?
Through you, presiding member, under the Act and Regs as it stands at the moment, we are required to do an annual review. So we did a similar process last year where we basically were in a situation where we needed to do just a desktop review. So we met our requirements under the legislation, and that's why we've taken, because the council is doing this work that'll feed into a major review of the city's strategic planning documents. We've basically taken this minimalist approach to meet the statutory requirements.
Yep, but what actually drives an annual review? Are we doing it, where are we? December. Are we doing it in December because we did it in December last year? What does an annual review mean? Does it mean within a financial year, or I'm just wondering what actually drives the deadline?
So firstly, usually it depends on when you first adopt your strategic community plan, and that required a desktop review every 2 years and then a major review every 4 years. So that could have been any month that you adopted that in a particular date, and then it triggers the strategic community plan reviews. And likewise with the corporate business plan, once again, it's when you first adopted that and if you do it annually. So every local government does it slightly differently. Some will align the updating of the corporate business plan with the adoption of the budget in terms of making sure they have financial years and are clearly articulating that. But ultimately it's up for council to decide, but it just says you need to do it annually.
Thank you. That's all a bit vague, but yeah, but that getting them, to line up sounds eminently sensible to me, and maybe that's something we'll look to in the future in our many jobs. But can I ask then, if we do this, in a sense, how big a deal is it? Because we can change it, and in any event, not much can happen without a council resolution and or a budget. I mean, some of the things in here are clearly costed and expected, and they're not very dramatic, but some of them we might want to change or tweak. So, I mean, I think when you look at something like this, you sort of worry that suddenly all sorts of things are going to be going on in the administration, and then you find out about it later and then go, oh yeah, well, you passed it in that December resolution. So I think what I've picked up is that there is going to be a chance to change it if we needed to, even if that was in 3 months' time or 6 months' time. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I could, through the chair, essentially you change it all the time by adopting resolutions that determine that we will undertake particular things, and then that then comes into this process. If it's a change in service, then we would obviously have different words to describe that service, or if there's a particular project that council decided was appropriate. Probably a classic would be the recent decision in terms of the Form Scribblers Festival, for example. So that's something that council determined to do. So just adopting this doesn't preclude you from deciding, actually, we've now had a more detailed conversation and we want to put less emphasis on that, and we want to put more emphasis on this. And ultimately, as you've described, each year the funding is determined through the budget or a budget review, which is subject to this as well. So there is a lot of flexibility, and that council can determine to do different projects, different services at any time of the year, and then that would flow into this annual review of the corporate business planning, or whatever it's going to be called in the future.
Does that mean you've got another question, Councillor Hammersley? No, okay. I think we're finished then. Item C6, the November budget review in 2021-2022. Any questions? Councillor Powell.
actually got, it's on page 34, and it's about the transfer of $45,000 for the Information Technology Reserve for the completion of the website redevelopment project. I was just wondering how much that project has now cost and how near it is to completion. Thank you.
I can do it. Thank you, and through you, presiding member, we'll take the first part of how much it costs on notice. We are in the final stages of rolling out our website, so we're just going through the current testing to make sure there's no bugs, and we hopefully will have a new website very soon in the coming weeks.
Any other questions? Councillor Powell.
About the infrastructure program and the seeking of grants to cover projects. I gather the city has nominated various drainage improvement projects. Could we be given some indication of what those projects are, please? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, I'd have to take that on notice, and I can provide a list to all councillors between now and next meeting.
Okay, I think now we're finished with that agenda item, so that brings us to the final one for consideration tonight, C7, financial statements and reports for the month ending 31st of October. Any questions about that item? Okay, I think that's a no. Next week we're going to have 2 confidential items, but both of those are not up for discussion tonight because we're still waiting on reports. So that brings us to the closure of the briefing session. I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 7th of December 2021 closed at 7:15 p.m. Thanks everyone.